Thank you, Ariel, for coming on and joining me on the podcast today. It's great to have you. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. You are the CEO and co-founder of Hivemapper, an interesting company that's on a mission to build a new global map of the world. And you're doing so in a very decentralized and sort of incentive-aligned manner with contributors from around the world, driving around their local cities or towns with dash cams in their cars and doing some other things to sort of help to build this map in a way that hasn't really been done before and would have been hard to do before crypto. So looking forward to digging into that. But before we get into it and talk about Hivemapper, would love to hear, for those who don't know you, if you could sort of tell your story from as early as you're willing to start to where you are today and talk about some of the decisions you made along the way.
Well, thank you for having me. This is quite the honor and appreciate it. You've had a lot of other great guests. And so, when you reached out, I was definitely like, let's do this. Yeah, so my journey starts way back when really my first job out of school was at Yahoo. It was at a time in 2005, 2006, when Yahoo was still very much competitive with Google in search. And so I sat in the search division in product management and was looking after basically all local data and then Yahoo Maps as well, and really helped grow that from very little to, in Maps, I think we got up to like about 80% market share. People don't realize that about 30% of all queries going into a search engine have some geo map local dimension to them. And so it's just a huge category of queries that you see every day in a search engine. And so when we were building Yahoo Maps and Yahoo local data, we would mostly just license data from third parties, right? And you would kind of aggregate all these, cleanse them, improve upon them where you could with other data, augment them, and then package it up into a UI, build algorithms on top of that data. But it really wasn't our own data to basically roll out Google Street View, and then they had other modes of collection as well, like airplanes and so forth. We saw that their market share started to increase dramatically. And it fundamentally just came back to like they had better data. It wasn't UI, it wasn't like other stuff that happened. It was like they were just collecting much higher quality data that was much fresher. And so at the time, we went to try to get more funding to basically do what they were doing, right? Because we felt like we need to pony up and go collect our own data. So I forgot. I think we went in and asked for like $220 million from the CEO at the time. We came back with something like 10 or $15 million. It was like, geez, what are you gonna do with this? Like map half California and then call it a day. So that was obviously really frustrating. So I just decided to leave Yahoo. I was very frustrated. But what I did recognize was just like how crazy expensive the approach that Google was taking. And if you could dramatically lower the cost to actually collecting and building this map data, that you would then be going after Google's Achilles heel. So the first company I started, called Gigwalk, was tackling that problem. We ultimately were not super successful, but the basic idea was we had 2 million people roughly with iPhone and Android devices all over the world collecting data. Actually, Google Maps was a customer of ours, Bing Maps was a customer of ours, Bloomberg Financial, Procter & Gamble. So these companies would basically put tasks into the system and they would say, we want to collect data about like stop signs or the price of tomatoes, or what does the end cap at Walmart's and Target's look like? Does it have this product versus that product? It worked from a certain perspective, but the economics of that business were horrible because we didn't actually own data. So we were basically just a data collection service. So put that, that ran its course. It was not very successful, like I said. But I said, okay, the core problem still exists in the world, which is we have not figured out how to dramatically lower the cost of mapping. And so I started Hivemapper in 2015. Initially, we started with drones. And the idea with drones was you kind of get a 2-for-1, right? You get the aerial perspective and you also get the street level perspective because of the angle of the camera on the drone, the fact that they're flying below clouds and they're flying so close to the ground. So that was appealing. It ultimately didn't work. It didn't scale. Why didn't it scale? Because battery technology and drones never really improved significantly. That was a big issue. The second issue was government regulation, right? Like every little city was like, no drones here, no drones there. Like you try to do that entire the world, it wasn't going to work. We were generating some revenue from that business, to be clear. I think it was like $5 or $6 million a year. And we were basically using all that revenue to fund the big pivot for the company, which was, okay, let's do street level mapping through dash cams. At the time, we were using a third-party dash cam. This is like 2018 timeframe. And that worked, right? Like as an entrepreneur, you kind of figure out like pretty quickly, is it working or is it not working? And if you're intellectually honest about it, you can tell. And so we figured out it was working, and we were paying people cash, right? And so there were two issues though. One issue, well, there were a lot of issues, but it was, even though it was working, one was the dash cam was a third-party dash cam. And so we couldn't make the experience entirely passive like we really wanted to. And making the experience entirely passive was really critical. That was one. The second thing was that we couldn't verify or ensure that the data was actually authentic to where it was collected, right? And so what does that mean? That means is like somebody could spoof the camera to say, hey, I'm actually collecting in Venice, California, when in fact they were in like remote, little tiny town in Kansas. And if you can spoof the network, then it basically kills customers' trust in the data. If it kills customer trust in the data gets destroyed, then you got a big problem on your hands. So that was one thing. The other thing is that from a cache-based system, what we saw was that the people who were actually collecting the data did not care about the network as a whole, right? They were just coin operated. It's kind of like the renter's mentality versus the owner's mentality. Some people had like their camera pointed in the air and they'd be like, well, I still got to get paid because I had the camera installed. We're like, but you're just looking at the sky. Like there's nothing useful there, right? So that's when I saw Helium. So Helium is a decentralized wireless network that is crypto incentive, where it aligns all the financial incentives between the people who are actually helping build the network and those, that are actually providing the network. And I thought that was really, really smart. And so we decided to do two things. We decided to A, build our own dash cam from scratch. And then B is adopt many of the Helium concepts from a business model perspective related to crypto into Hivemapper. We raised $18 million in 2021 and then launched our own dash cam, get a lot of pre-orders for that. I think it was like 7,000 pre-orders or something like that for the dash cam. The dash cam started to ship in November of last year. Fast forward to today, what are we like, April 3rd, April 4th? And we're up to like about 100,000 unique road kilometers per day. We're up to about 1.5 million or 1.4 million unique road kilometers mapped globally. To put that into context, and so in 4 months, we've done 1.4 million unique road kilometers, and there's about 60 million unique road kilometers in the world. So it is growing at an incredibly fast pace. It's probably growing 5x faster than Google Street View. I would argue probably closer to 8x or 9x. But that's where we're at today. It's been fun to watch the growth of it, and a lot of the things that we thought would work are working. So that's where we're at. That's our crazy wild journey that we were on.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you sharing the story and starting from the beginning and your time at Yahoo and going on to Gigwalk and ultimately Hivemapper, first with drones and now with crypto. So obviously been paying attention to some of the new and exciting technologies and trying to use them to bring this dream of building a new global map of the world in a more decentralized way to fruition. And hopefully crypto will finally be that thing. I think it certainly seems. It seems like a very interesting application. A lot of people are building in crypto, for the sake of crypto. We talked about this a little bit before getting on the recording, but it feels like we're due for some apps that are actually utilizing crypto in a way that, companies couldn't have been built prior to it. Sort of the infrastructure is now here. There's enough of it. And like, what interesting things can we do? So Helium is one very interesting example. And I know you guys are close and partner with them directly on certain things. And now here's Hivemapper, which is another. One thing that I'm sort of curious about is you mentioned, obviously Gigwalk, like you guys had, pretty material revenue for a while, but just sort of felt it wasn't working. There were issues with the business that, were too much to be overcome with like tweaks here and there. Hivemapper, similarly with drones, you recognize the same thing. But then when you tried, you were using the third-party dash cams, you realized, actually this is working, but there were still like a lot of problems. Like it was cash based, like you said, no ownership mentality. How do you like, it seems you said like if you're intellectually honest, you can sort of tell the difference between if it's working and if it's not. But from the outside looking at it, it wouldn't seem that it would be super obvious. Like it could be pretty difficult sometimes because there are, even if it's working, there are a lot of problems. And if there are a lot of problems, you can be like, well, maybe it is working, but there's just a lot of problems right now. How do you know, like, how did you distinguish at that time, like, this is the path we need to go? And these problems are fixable, but this is sort of the right direction to march forward in.
Yeah, I think the key is that, the analogy I would use is like pushing a rock up the hill. Like if you, in order to grow the thing that you're growing, and if you're constantly like pushing the rock up the hill, that's a problem. But if at a certain point, the rest of the community, the people who are actually injecting, oxygen and utility and value into the product are helping you push the rock up the hill, then all of a sudden it feels like, you don't have to quite work as hard. I mean, obviously you're working incredibly hard, but the collective effort of everybody, right? Customers and contributors, like the entire ecosystem is pushing momentum forward with you, then you're onto something. Now, look, you're still going to have problems, right? Like every day there's going to be a new issue that's going to come up that you're going to have to solve. So that doesn't mean you're devoid of problems, but it does mean that you get this sense of, it's not just you and your core team that is pushing the rock up the hill. You now have, whether it be 200 people or 500 people or 1,000 people or 3,000 people, whatever that number is, everybody is like collectively trying to push that thing up the hill. And it feels a little bit lighter to each individual who is, participating in that and pushing up the hill. So that's the distinction that I would make. And, that's just like you develop that from experience, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's just like a gut feel, basically.
Yeah, it is. Like you just smell it, right? And it's like you're a heat-seeking missile and you're looking for that. And if you don't see that, and if you don't feel that, then you just got to like figure out like, okay, maybe there are some things I can fix here, maybe there's not, but like once you experience that, then you know exactly what it looks like. And then you just got to lean hard into it and, attack that problem very aggressively with as many resources as possible. Because that moment won't be there forever either, right? If you don't take fully advantage of it. So that's always been like my thing is like when you start to see that everybody else is on, quote unquote, on the same team pushing the rock up the hill, then it gets a lot easier. And then what happens is, at some point you reach the top of the hill, and then when you're coming down with like a tremendous amount of momentum, right? And that's amazing, right? That then you're like really, accelerating to a place where you could then achieve a true global scale.
Yeah, it's interesting too. You brought up the point about, one of the issues that crypto solved in this case was the lack of an ownership mentality where, you were basically like renting labor, and like these people, people could point their dash cam in the wrong direction. They just don't really care. Like they want to do sort of the bare minimum or whatever. Or, maybe some people are trying hard just out of integrity or whatever it might be, that just the pride of doing a good job. But the incentives aren't quite there where it really matters. Like you're either doing enough to get paid or you're not. But being a part of, a community and an ecosystem, and getting rewarded in tokens and being incentivized for the whole pie to basically grow and Hivemapper to become successful. There's a whole nother element of wanting to do a good job there, wanting to do a great job and sort of contribute beyond maybe what, strictly what you're getting paid to do specifically, and actually just trying to do a great job and help build the thing. And, a lot of people want, purpose and whatever. And like maybe they find that with their day job or with their family or with their friends or whatever it might be. But like having a thing that you're doing on the side with like a global community, people around the world doing something that might actually prove valuable as well in terms of, monetarily. It's very interesting. And like, I'm kind of surprised that there's still not that many projects. Like Helium's another one that we talked about, but still not that many projects I feel like that are really doing this in a way where people are going out there and doing something in the physical world and taking advantage of that crypto, that feature basically of tokenomics, which is the ability to align people around something. Do you agree generally with that? Are you seeing other things out there that are making good advantage of this? What are your thoughts?
There's definitely not as many, right? I think look, the crypto winter or whatever we're in right now has definitely had an effect, a dampening effect in terms of new projects getting created. I think that's one. I think the crypto industry as a whole did themselves a little bit of a disservice, not a little bit, a lot of a disservice, right? Because there were a lot of scams, right? And so I think that for a lot of entrepreneurs who kind of said, "Ooh, this is interesting," they didn't want to be "quote unquote" tainted by all of these scams that existed in the crypto industry. And I think that it's incumbent upon the crypto industry as a whole to call those things out for what they are, and suppress them. I mean, look, in the Web 2 era, there was a lot of scams, but the primary way which things got discovered in the Web 2 world was through Google, right? And Google effectively just suppressed them or ignored them, and so they never got exposure. Unfortunately, that's not the case in the crypto world in this day and age with social and a lot of other things where these scams can kind of spread. And so I think that, job number one is for, those, and I think Coinbase is doing a really good job of this in terms of leading the industry now and is being very vocal about this, is like, look, we got to get rid of bad actors, right? We got to get rid of people who are in this for the wrong reasons. And once we do that, then I think it'll start to attract, really a new group of entrepreneurs that are high quality, that are going after and tackling many of these different problems. But yeah, look, the industries that we're talking about are massive, right? Like the wireless industry that Helium is going after is trillions of dollars per year, right? The mapping and geo, there's billions of people who touch Google Maps every single day. There's millions of businesses that pay for Google Maps APIs in a whole, every single day, and in large sums. So there's many other industries that can benefit from this approach as well. And so we just haven't, we were just starting to touch the surface of it. But it will take time, right? I think like the thing with wireless, the thing with maps is that these are not like overnight successes in the sense of, fully monetizing them and fully capturing the revenue opportunity here. You got to first build the coverage, right? Because your coverage is effectively your product. And then once you have a meaningful coverage, right? Because most customers don't want to deal with things that don't have, good, reliable coverage. Then and only then can you turn around to customers and start to sell, right? And so I think that that's a big challenge for us. That's a big challenge for Helium. That's a big challenge for many other participants who are going to take the same approach. Is you need a set of folks who are going to come along for you over many years, who are going to continue to believe, continue to execute, understanding that these networks on the global scale that they're needed do take time to fully evolve.
Right. And I think people, so I mean, I'm hoping we see some more projects like this. And I'm just hearing, I've heard, did a lot of prep for the podcast today, and heard you talk about Hivemapper at length on other podcasts, and write about it, and, read the website and everything like that. And it seems to me that the general sort of business of maps is relatively unknown and not understood by the common public relative to how important it is and like how valuable it is. Like you mentioned earlier, 30% of search queries involve geomaps in some way. You mentioned Google Maps probably as a standalone worth like somewhere around $100 billion, something like that. And I don't think people really as a consumer myself, like it's like, okay, I use a map when I'm using GPS to go somewhere in the car or on foot. And, I'll use it to look up like, where's a restaurant near me or whatever it might be. But people don't understand like the business to business application, or like why someone would be paying Google Maps for their mapping and things like this. So before we dive into like Hivemapper, can you sort of explain the business behind maps and why it is so valuable to have, excellent, frequently refreshing worldwide maps?
Yeah. So the first thing to remember is like, what is maps? And so Google, obviously, from a search engine perspective, crawls the internet, right? And if you crawl the internet, you're literally like, grabbing every single web page, understanding what's on that web page, what web page links to which web page, right? And that understanding of the web is incredibly valuable, because then you can satisfy people's searches, right? When they come and search for, information related to medical issues, or to like you said, restaurants, or to like whatever the topic is, they have that existing understanding. So maps is, crawling, but instead of crawling the internet, you're crawling the physical world, right? And so you need to see all these different parts of the world, right, to answer questions. So if somebody has a question about, Lagos, Nigeria, or Manila, or Chicago, or Los Angeles, you have an understanding of every single block, what's the address, what are the turn restrictions on that block, what businesses are on that block, how many lanes are on that block. So it's a really, really hard problem in terms of crawling the physical world. And then you have all these like privacy issues, national security issues, right, layered on top of it, et cetera. So we'll get more into that. But the other thing to remember with maps is there's different types of people who use maps. So let's start with the consumer. You alluded to this. That's people like you and I. Hey, we got to go to the office. We got to go to the airport. How do we get from point A to point B? We want to understand the traffic. We want to understand turn-by-turn directions, all that kind of stuff. So that's, many billions of people every single day use that. Obviously, Google Maps is the biggest, but also Apple Maps. Then there are businesses like Uber, like Yelp, like Airbnb, like the US government, like your local city, like insurance companies that integrate maps into their own applications, right? So let's take Uber. You open up the Uber app underneath, hey, I want a taxi. So I want an Uber cab here. That's all mostly driven by Google Maps, right? You're like looking at different properties on Airbnb or Redfin or Zillow. The context of which you're looking at those different properties all lives on side of the map, right? And then you want to like go and look at it, you go look at Google Street View. That's all, like that's Uber or Redfin or Zillow all paying Google Maps. And there's millions of businesses who pay Google Maps to integrate the products into the services. There's a third growing part. So those are the two primary ones today. There's a third growing one, which are cars. So not cars in the sense of like it, like a lot of these high-end cars like BMWs and Audis and some like Ford F-150s, they have a map integrated for human consumption, right? So does Tesla's. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about here is the car itself is using data from the map. So for example, the car says, I'm automatically driving on the highway. The speed goes from 65 miles an hour to 55 miles an hour. The car automatically slows down, right? That's the car consuming data from the map to then make a decision about how to drive the car, how fast to drive the car, right? The car starts to like get off the highway and there's like a turn. And so it needs to understand what the bank of that turn is, right? How aggressive that turn is to then modulate how fast it should go around that turn, right? It needs to know how many different lanes there are, right? Is there one lane to exit or are there two lanes to exit? It needs to know whether or not there's an HOV lane or if there's a bus lane. Like all of these detailed information, that's the car consuming the map data and then making decisions based on that. And that is a incredibly fast growing, you can understand like why the freshness there is so important. And so you're going to see more and more of that. And there's billions of cars, in the world. So like that'll take time to deploy to every single car, but that's what effectively is happening now. And so that's a third large consumer of map data. The thing that most people don't realize is the freshness, right? If you came to me and said, hey, build a map of the world once, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the hardest, I'd be like, okay, that's like a 7, maybe even a 6. The hard part here is maintaining the freshness of the map and doing it cost effectively. And that's where you go from like, problem that's like a 6 or a 7 to a problem that's like a 10. And I would argue even Google doesn't do that well today. And Google doesn't do that well today because the cost structure that they have to be updating the maps is so incredibly expensive. And so they do, a reasonably good job in places like San Francisco and LA and London. But you go outside of the United States, beyond London, Paris, Madrid, Berlin, et cetera, like there's a steep drop off in terms of quality and freshness beyond that.
And how do I think about the difference between, I mean, first of all, that's super helpful, sort of like overview. Definitely helps my understanding a lot and probably people listening as well. But how do I think about the difference between Google Maps, which to your point, there's somewhat limited freshness and especially outside of, major US or European cities and whatnot, the more, developing of an area it is, the worse it's going to be, or the less fresh at least it's going to be probably. And even, stuff that you would imagine would be pretty reliable. It's probably not, like I heard you talk about how Toronto, I think, is surprisingly not very good in terms of the mapping. So, and the
Mhm.
freshness. But how do I think about the difference between like Google Maps and which is like very comprehensive, but maybe not super fresh, versus like a Waze where I don't really know how comprehensive it is. But when if I use Waze on a car ride, when I'm driving, like it's got, the police is here and there they are, and the crash is here and there it is. And it seems like extremely fresh.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm sort of missing, like, do you need to combine these things in a way that's not currently being done well enough? Or is there a level of sort of freshness even beyond Waze, or at least equivalent to what Waze it does at its best in its best areas, but doing it on a worldwide scale? How should I think about like the remaining problem that needs to be solved?
Yeah, so what Waze is reasonably good at is like there's a couple things. One is yes, if there's very, very good density in a city, then Waze, like for a police, like, okay, yeah, there's a police here. Like you do run into this issue of trust with Waze, right? Which is it's literally just somebody has to tap a button. And so you need multiple confirmations to like truly trust it, right?
Yeah, I
That's
should I should mention sometimes the cop is not there and the accident is not there. So it's not
right.
like
Exactly.
perfect or anything, but
Yeah.
it's reasonably good.
Yeah. So the trust is a big issue. The other thing is, and this kind of gets to this idea of imagery, where we think that we have a leg up relative to Waze, which is you don't really understand the severity of the problem, right? So, for example, a car accident. If you really understood that this was like a three-car crash versus a fender bender, you know you're going to be there for a while, right? And if you could, with an image, you can see it, right? Like, holy shit, that's a three-car crash. I'm going to be here for a while, right? Or like, oh, up ahead of me as I'm going to Tahoe, like I start to see the traffic, deteriorate. What is the cause of that, right? Okay, I hear the weather hasn't gotten good, isn't as good up there, but like I'd like to see that, right? I'd like to understand what are we dealing with, 50 miles ahead of me or 75 miles ahead of me. And we think imagery really helps satisfy people's curiosity, but more importantly, really gives them a trustworthy verification of like, here's what's actually happening, right? You don't have to trust that somebody's description of the problem or hitting a button. Like, no, here, just look at the image and you will see for yourself. And we're just starting to see the hints of this, which is really exciting, where you have this combination of humans inside of Hivemapper, right? The contributors who can start to alert the rest of the network of some of these problems utilizing imagery, right, that are coming off the dash cam with AI that is starting to detect some of these different issues. And it paints a much more authentic picture of what's actually happening. And it paints that picture much faster because you don't need 5 or 10 or 15 people to confirm it. And it really satisfies human curiosity, which then kind of lowers anxiety levels, right? When you're stuck in traffic, what's the first thing that you do? You're like trying to move the car around so you can kind of potentially get a better angle on like whatever's causing the problem. And so, but if you can just see the picture of what's actually causing the problem, then it kind of lowers the driver's anxiety. So it's new. What's kind of just started to happen, and I'm very excited to kind of see where this goes.
That's helpful as well. One of the things I picked up in sort of, prepping and everything is usually you see in like a given business, if you can make something like 10x cheaper, or even 100x, to be super ambitious, cheaper, then like you're going to be able to deliver a product that's just like next generation versus whatever the previous thing was. um you guys that, with you're selling your dash cams for $500, and granted it might not be like one to one that a dash cam is quite as useful, like one dash cam in one car for you guys is maybe not as useful, um as one Google car that's going around and mapping their maps, but at the same time, it's literally like 1,000 times cheaper. At least that's what I saw, like 500K
Yeah.
for one of those Google cars, and $500 or thereabouts, $600 for one of your guys' dash cams. So is that sort of the key innovation there, or one of the key innovations where you're just with the cam in existing cars and the, incentivization provided by the tokenomics, involving the crypto and everything, like this starts to just make it way more economical to be able to increase freshness to a degree that just is not economically feasible at Google's price, per vehicle?
That's exactly it. Like what we're seeing right now is just like there's roads that Google has never seen, right? Like literally never seen. And by the way, this is not like in places that are, in the remote parts of the Amazon or something like that. We're talking about like Abu Dhabi. We're talking about like Irvine, California, and they're showing up on Hivemapper now. And they're showing up, in some cases, Google's never seen them at all, or in some cases, Google hasn't seen them in 8 years, and we're now seeing them like every week or every other week. That's part A. Then we start to see parts of a city that Google has never seen because they're access restricted, right? If you're talking about gated communities, right? Google Street View car cannot get into most of these gated communities, right? Well, there's still deliveries happening in these gated communities, whether it be FedEx or DHL or some other delivery company, right? They ultimately have to deliver goods and products and services. There's Uber cars or Ola cabs that are going inside of these gated communities and other places that, have some sort of privacy restriction or gate associated with them. So we're getting an access to so many different places that, Google Street View will never be able to see. Like, I mean, they could increase the number of cars that they have by 100 to like match what we have, but they'll still never get access to them because of just how they're getting deployed. And so we're just seeing like the tip of the iceberg associated with that. The other part about this is that it's a little bit of nuance, but I think it's an important nuance, is that the world is a messy, chaotic place. And it is for us, and it is for Google Street View as well. And so what does that mean? I think about this in terms of shots on goal, right? So Google, when its cars are out in this messy, chaotic world, it gets one shot on goal of a given location. But if that given location, you see this all the time, especially in cities like New York and others, there's trucks, there's buses that are obstructing your view of all the different signs, all the different issues, all the names of the businesses, all the addresses, right? The really valuable information that make up a map. And so that's a problem for Google Street View in the sense that they're not going to see that same location for maybe another 12, at best, another 12, 14 months, but probably more likely 2 years. And whereas we will run into those same issues, right? We will get obstructed by buses and trucks and so forth. And, for that one moment in time, we will not be able to make a good map, right? But guess what? We're going to see that location maybe a week from now, 2 weeks from now, at worst, maybe a month from now. So we don't care that much, right? And so that's just because we have many, many more shots on goal, we can build a much better map over time than Google. And so I think that goes back to like just our approach in terms of being super cost effective versus Google Street View is enabling us to then see so many different parts of the world and then build a better map.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so we've referenced sort of the tokenomics that helps enable this a few times, but we haven't actually dug into how this works. So I think that would be really useful for A, just for people to understand, and B, for people who might be interested in actually, following up, listening to this and going and buying a dash cam and getting involved and, understanding what exactly they would be getting involved in. So I think there's the one aspect of it, which is, pretty reasonably easy to understand. Like, you buy a dash cam, put it in your car, go drive around and sort of get rewards through what you guys have called the honey token to, for that work that you're doing and contributing. On the other side, it's not so obvious to me, especially because, like we talked about earlier, some people don't really have a great understanding, although, maybe a better one now, of, what the map business is like. Like, now we understand, Uber is paying Google Maps for their maps, and Airbnb and Zillow, and some of these cars with their autonomous functionality as well. And I understand there's basically a mechanism where, the drivers with dash cams are earning the tokens, and then the people who are basically Hivemapper customers, in a sense, the businesses rather, are sort of, they have to like buy the tokens in order to basically pay. And so there's like some burning involved, but you could probably give a much better explanation with some particulars maybe.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so before we get to like the exact tokenomics and how that all works, let's just back up here because I think it's an important concept to understand. So, Waze, we talked about Waze. Waze was definitely crowdsourced, right? But let's dig into what that means in terms of crowdsourced, right? There were two modes of contribution within Waze, right? One is you and I driving around with the Waze app open, and they're effectively pulling all of our GPS coordinates, right? What's commonly referred to as GPS traces, from our app. And then they're trying to derive information like, okay, geez, we've never seen anybody go down this path over here. Is that a new road, right? Okay, we see 10 people going down this now. Obviously, we don't have cameras, so we can't see where they're actually driving. But they basically try to then use those GPS traces to infer and determine, okay, is this a one-way street? Is this a two-way street? Everybody seems to be going about 40 miles an hour. So we assume that the speed limit is 40 miles an hour, right? So there's a whole bunch of algorithms that they then use on top of those GPS traces to try to form the map. The other mode of contribution in Waze was, or still is, effectively map editing. What does that mean? Those means like there's about 30 to 40,000 people, according to the Wall Street Journal, that are sitting behind a computer. They're called Waze map editors, and they are very tediously on a computer screen editing the map. So they're literally saying, over here, there's a one-way street, right? The speed limit over here is 45 miles an hour, right? Over here at the corner, there's a Starbucks, right? Over here, you're not allowed to make a right-hand turn because of one-way street. It is very, very tedious work. So look, my thing is that all those people were working for free. They were unpaid contributors, but without them, there is no map, right? And the economic interests of all the different participants were not aligned, right? You have employees that if the map becomes very successful, will do very well. You have investors that if the map does very well, they'll make out as well. But all these people, who are actually building the map, and let's be clear, without them, there is no Waze, basically got nothing, right? Like zero. Their economic interest was a big fat zero. So I think that's wrong. And I think that crypto helps address part of that problem, not all the problems associated with that, but part of the problems. And it basically says that, look, if you're helping build this map, right, you're building an economic interest in this map by contributing to it, right? You're providing value, you're providing a service to all of these customers that then want to use the map. And so there are two primary modes of earning today, earning honey, that is. One is by driving around with a dash cam. And you install the dash cam. It takes about 10, 15 minutes to install, connect to your Android or iPhone, and then you just drive like you normally would. We don't want people like quitting their jobs and driving big, you can do whatever you want, but like the system was not designed that way. But if you're just driving, great. Like Hivemapper and the Hivemapper dashcam wants to be part of that drive. So that's one mode of contribution and really the primary way which you earn honey tokens today. And then there's a second one, which is around how do you help train the AI systems, right? So what does that mean to help train the AI system? So these are people sitting behind their computer and they're saying, oh, that's a 35 mile, like our AI system is saying, we think there's a 35 mile per hour speed limit sign. Can you confirm this or is this wrong, right? We think that, we've blurred all the faces of people in this location and all the license plates. Please confirm that we did this accurately. So that's another mode of contribution, basically training our AI systems by editing these different objects and things in the map, or confirming or denying the accuracy of the AI. And so, as more and more customers then use the map, right? And so I'll pause there. Any questions we want to dig in before we get into like how customers, buy and use the map, and then how that ultimately flows back to the contributors.
Yeah, I think that makes sense on the contribution and like earning side. And let's go to the other side of the equation.
Okay. So on the other side of the question, the important thing here to remember is there's two entities. There's Hivemapper Inc., right? The company. It's a normal company. We do business in cash, like US dollars, all that kind of stuff. And then there's the mapping network. So Hivemapper Inc. is effectively licenses data from the mapping network. That's the important thing to remember here in terms of these two different entities. So Hivemapper Inc., like any normal technology startup, has marketing people, has salespeople. We go out, we find a customer, right, who says, yes, I would like to spend $100,000 utilizing this map API, right? So the map API could be as like, hey, for 10,000 unique road kilometers, I want all the imagery, and I want all speed signs, and I want all stop signs, and I want all traffic signs, and I want all parking restriction signs, as an example. Okay, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, that's going to be, I'm just making this number up, that's going to be $100,000 for the year, right? And you can use up to 10,000 unique road kilometers, and you can spend that as how you would like. So that's $100,000 in fiat cash. That's all, And then what we do, Hivemapper Inc. does, is we then turn around to the mapping network and we say, we would like to license X amount of data, and we will pay you the fee, right? So right now it's 2 cents per map credit. So what happens in that transaction? We buy map credits from the mapping network. That then gives the mapping network the rights to basically effectively buy honey from existing contributors, or whoever wants to sell, whoever has honey can sell it. And so we then say, okay, we're going to buy, I'm just making these numbers up, I'm going to buy 50,000 honey tokens from all these different contributors of people who will sell it to me at this X price. Okay, so now there are 50,000 honey tokens that have been effectively removed, right? And as a result of burning or removing those 50,000 honey tokens, the mapping network now has the rights to effectively mint a new 50,000 honey tokens that can be mined for work, that is, right? For like helping grow the map in terms of map coverage, driving around, or, helping train our AI to help improve the map and the map quality. And so what you're then seeing is a replenishment, right, of honey tokens that then, as more contributors drive more, they'll earn these additional now 50,000 honey tokens, or whatever the number was, that were burned as a result of that, right? And so that's kind of driving the value back into the honey token that is the core entity that all these contributors are earning.
Right. And have you seen this sort of the supply and demand dynamic, play out in the early days? Is it like balancing reasonably well? I believe there's like 10 billion honey tokens, and that's like a hard cap. Are there any issues, like foreseeable issues and resolutions that you have sort of ready to handle, various things that might come up? Or is this, I don't know actually how, precedented this model is, other than Helium, which does something similar. So I'm curious if you've thought about, basically the various challenges that could come up, and how you guys are ready to resolve them.
Yeah. So look, in the early days, you're definitely like, there's about 4 billion, there are 4 billion honey tokens that can be mined by contributors of the 10 billion, like right now. And so in the early days, and this was all public, we were basically saying, okay, we're going to start to reward these honey tokens to contributors for their work. There's not a lot of burning transactions happening. Why? Because there's not a lot of coverage, right? And so we are kind of in that phase of the chicken and the egg, right? Yep. And we are like dead set in that core time period right now. And I think you just got to be very open and transparent about that. It was like, look, we're all building map coverage here, right? If we build map coverage and then we can, turn that map coverage into high quality data products, right? And then we can go market and sell that, then we have something, right? And so a couple of notes. One is that we were definitely very conservative about the number of honey tokens that were being minted every single week. Why? Because the worst thing you can do is you can basically just go way too aggressive, way too quickly, right? And then you don't have enough honey tokens to kind of get you over the hump of building up really, really strong map coverage, right? And so we've been very cautious, very conservative. And I think the foundation actually published a document which said is basically, given the current minting schedule, it would take Hivemapper 70 to 80 years to go through all 4 billion honey tokens. That's a long time. That's probably too long. And so there were some modifications that were made to that to try to reduce that. And so that has happened over the last 2 weeks, and we're starting to see that play out. But look, I think that it'll take some time to build a map and the map coverage, right? And, there are customers who have already bought, and, there are definitely customers that we're talking to right now that are like, look, like once you have these regions of the world covered, right, I'm in, right? And so obviously those regions of the world are getting prioritized. And you can definitely earn more right now in certain regions of the world because we know there's customer demand on the other side. But there's no I think the thing here to remember is you just got to, this is a problem. There's a problem. Like if we're doing cash, if we're doing crypto, if we're doing like crowdsourced, unpaid work, like Waze, you just got to stare this problem in the face and deal with it because, this is where the value gets created. Now, the good part about this is that if once you reach the other side and it looks like basically given the trajectory and the momentum that we have, we will reach the other side. But if you reach the other side, it's not like you're dealing with 50 competitors on the other side. And so, once you do reach the other side, then you have something that is really interesting, really valuable, really unique. But yeah, you just got to stare it in the face and dig in and go for it and make it happen and execute day in, day out.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And I think, I know we're going over on time now, so I'll make this the last question. But we've talked, quite a bit about sort of understanding the value of maps in general beyond what most people sort of interact with on a daily basis. Talked about the problems with existing solutions, why Google Maps is so expensive, everything like that. And then the solution that Hivemapper is bringing to the table with dash cams and crypto and everything that you guys are doing, the whole strategy, I think is it makes a lot of sense to me at least. The other thing that I think is kind of interesting looking forward to the future, which I've heard you touch on a little bit, is maybe the market for maps and the demand for maps and, fresh maps, globally comprehensive maps, maybe that even has a lot of room to grow beyond just the Ubers and Airbnbs and Zillows and the cars, like you mentioned earlier. And if you think about it, all of those things, the cars for the autonomous features and everything, that's very new. Uber and Airbnb obviously are very new. The whole space is relatively new. The internet itself, with Google and everything is not that old with Google Maps. One interesting space that I've heard you bring up was augmented reality and how AR may, be, I think the right way to think about it is like these AR providers, whether it's Meta or whoever it might be, they're going to need mapping and this imagery that Hivemapper is collecting. Can you talk a little bit about, that as well as any other sort of emerging sort of frontier spaces that may make this mission even more valuable, sort of the prize at the end of the tunnel that you're going for?
Yeah. I think AR is fascinating. Let's take Niantic, right? Niantic Labs is the one that created Pokemon Go, which is probably, the first real eye-opening experience with AR. And I think even they would admit the next version where it's kind of more integrated into your glasses and other type of stuff like that is ultimately where this is going. But yeah, so the core issue with AR is that fundamentally trying to communicate or have an experience like a game experience or whatever it is in the physical world, but where you're augmenting that physical world with some some virtual object, right? So let's say you had a snake, part of a game or even a little entertainment bit or whatever it is, where you're trying to, wrap a snake around a fire hydrant, right? And if that fire hydrant isn't physically there, it doesn't make sense, right? The whole story kind of falls apart if you just see this snake wrapping around, nothing. And so understanding that there's what the object is. So A, there's an object there, and B, there's a fire hydrant that the snake is wrapping itself around is critical to the storytelling experience. And so understanding the physical world at a very, very, very granular level really brings these stories alive, right? brings this mode of communicating alive in a way that we just don't experience today. And so what does that mean is like you just have to have incredibly fresh maps, and those maps have to have a very, very detailed understanding of all the different objects inside of them in order to enable developers to create compelling stories and compelling communication experiences on top of it. From a day-to-day utility perspective, right? When people walk around, especially in busy parts of the world, how do they navigate? Like I was in Vegas and I was trying to like get an Uber, get out of the hotel and get to like the stand where you could get the Uber. Like it's not easy, right? Like to like navigate these like massive hotel complexes. You think you're going to the front door. No, you don't go to the front door. You have to go down this like, escalator and then grab another escalator. Like you could imagine just like how helpful, maps integrated into an AR experience can kind of help you navigate through the series of doors, down the escalators, through another hallway, down another escalators to like ultimately get to the place where you can pick up your Uber. So there's a lot of experiences like that I think are, we haven't seen, quite frankly, and they will require incredibly fresh maps. But they're definitely like 2 to 4 years away in terms of reaching some sort of global scale. And there's still like a lot of hardware that needs to get built to support that. So we have a little bit of time before we get there.
Yeah, well, we'll see what Apple's next announcement has. I know there's rumors that they might be doing something there, but I think it seems like we have at least a couple of years, like you said, until this AR is sort of ubiquitous or even beginning to become so.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think we've gone over on time, so I appreciate you doing that. But it's been great talking with you about Hivemapper and your story of how you got here and everything like that, and very excited about what you guys are doing and looking forward to following along here forward. It sounds like you've got close to 1.5 million unique kilometers mapped, and I think you mentioned there's like 60 million practically in the world. So you're like a 40th of the way there, which actually, given what you were saying about you've got like the tokens were being issued at like a 70-year long pace or something like that, like you're ahead of schedule, I think, from a perspective. And so it all sounds really interesting, and I'm seeing a lot of people contributing in the ecosystem are very excited about it. So if I drove more, I should get a dash cam. I don't really drive a whole lot, but it's interesting. And I'm glad we got to talk about it, and people are going to get to hear about it. So thank you again for taking the time. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
you should buy one and then recruit an Uber driver or Lyft driver, and then you guys could split the tokens between the two of you.
Yeah, there you go. That's clever. I don't need to do the driving myself. I'll source the dash cam and figure out a deal. But anyway, thank you again for coming on and taking the time. Really appreciate it. Where can people go and follow you and follow Hivemapper and maybe go and buy a dash cam if they want?
Yeah, you just head over to hivemapper.com and learn all about the project, and you can follow us on Twitter. We're pretty active on Twitter as well. And you can see like a lot of the different dash cams that people are out there mapping with today to kind of get a feel for where they're mapping, all the different dash cam setups that people are doing all over the world. It's kind of fun to see how this has evolved over different cultures and different types of cars and different places in the world. It's fun to watch.